Daniel Sports Central, we go over our next scheduled preview of this offseason, and it's going to be over the USC Trojans, a team that was definitely one of the bigger disappointments in college football last season, as many expected them to be a potential dark horse. Kind of a surprise seeing this team not even make it to a bowl game last season, but moving forward into 2022, things have changed a lot already for the Trojans, and we're only in February. Caleb Williams, of course, is coming to town. Same thing with Travis Dye, and a brand new head coach in Lincoln Riley. So kind of a fresh slate for USC, and this team definitely shows potential going into 2022. We'll be going over the players this team will be losing, who they'll be returning, and also looking at their schedule for the first time this offseason. Starting out with your notable games from last season, this team once again 4-8 overall, so definitely a big disappointment of a season. And honestly, I thought USC for sure would be a 7-9 win team, potentially even higher than that. Of course, USC, they returned a lot of talented players from 2020 to 2021. So there's a lot of reason to believe so. Plus, the quarterback situation looked great. Kedon Slovis and then Jackson Dart, who was a very high-rated recruit back in high school. So there's a lot of potential for this team last season, and obviously it didn't really turn out that way. But USC 4-8 overall last year. Beat Washington State 45-14. Beat Colorado on the road as well, 37-14. But otherwise, lost to Oregon State 27-45. Lost to Notre Dame by 15. Got beat up by UCLA and lost to BYU by 4 as well. But looking at your roster going into next season, things have changed a lot. And we're only in February once again. The transfer portal's been huge for this team. Caleb Williams, they landed him. And, of course, he signed on just a couple of weeks ago here back on February 1st. And that is a huge addition for this football team. Caleb Williams last year played just about half the season for Oklahoma when Spencer Rattler was benched. Caleb Williams got his opportunity, and he played overall really well and looked like one of the better quarterbacks in the nation when he did play last season. So that's a huge pickup for this team, landing Caleb Williams. Kedon Slovis has transferred to Pittsburgh, and Jackson Dart has transferred to Ole Miss. So both quarterbacks are out of the picture going into next season there, or at least the 2021 quarterbacks. But once again, when you got Caleb Williams, there's no doubt that he would beat out both Dart and Slovis for that starting position, so it kind of makes sense. But Kedon Slovis last year, his stats were pretty underwhelming considering there was a decent amount of hype around him. He put up 2,100 yards, 11 touchdowns, 8 picks, and a 65% completion rate. So his accuracy was okay. His touchdown to interception ratio obviously wasn't very good, so that was a part of the reason why we saw split production between Slovis and Dart last year. But Dart, when he played, 1,300 yards, 9 touchdowns, 5 picks. Overall, not a terrible season for Dart when he played, but once again, both quarterbacks really just weren't top tier, to say the least, for this team last year, and it just was not enough to lead USC to a bowl game. Running back situation, got Travis Dye coming in from Oregon. That is a huge addition. Travis Dye was a major impact player in the backfield for Oregon. He carried that backfield for the Ducks last year. So Travis Dye coming in is going to be huge. I think people are kind of overlooking that. Travis Dye is a big-time player. Definitely extremely talented running back. So that's going to be huge bringing him in. But you do lose your top 2 running backs from last season, Keontae Ingram and then Vavae Malapai, both of which who combined for just over 1,600 yards and 11 touchdowns last year. So losing those 2 running backs definitely you could say is going to be tough. But when you got Travis Dye coming in, I'm really not too concerned about the backfield going into next season. Plus, you got some pretty good depth back there as well. As for the receiving core, Drake London, your top receiver from last year, is not coming back. He put up just over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns last year. So that's going to be tough on the receiving core, losing your top there. But you do return your second in Taj Washington, as well as Bryant Jr., Gary Bryant Jr., who is your third receiver. So you got your second and third receivers both coming back, which is good. Overall, the receiving core has got some pretty good depth going into next season. So really, skill players positions look excellent for USC going into next season. You do lose a couple of key players, but then again, you bring in a couple of the transfers. Plus, I like the depth in the receiving core. So USC in general, this offense definitely looks like it's got a ton of potential to make some major strides going into 2022. As for the offensive line, you lose 2 on there. You lose 1 defensive lineman, 2 linebackers, and then 3 in the secondary. So defensively, you do lose 6 starters. That's the main concern I'd say on this team for me is defensively. This offense now is built to definitely be a major Pac-12 contender. It's just a matter of the defense. Can this defense show up to play and lead this team to a Pac-12 title? This offense definitely can now. You got some major playmakers with Caleb Williams and Travis Dye, 2 of the best players at their positions in the country, coming into the same school. So, that's a huge deal. So it's just a matter of the defense and whether or not this defense can get it together and have a good season. If they do, this USC team is a big-time dark horse contender, potentially even nationally. So, but how much potential the Trojans have? Once again, this team is going to heavily depend on the defense, but I think the ceiling is pretty high for the Trojans going into next season. Transfer portal and recruiting going into next season. Of course, this team has been extremely active in the transfer portal, and these are just your 8 most notable players, I would say, that have some sort of influence by USC, other than Caleb Williams and Travis Dye. So you got Raymond Scott, a linebacker who's taken off to Fresno State, Terrell Bynum coming in from Washington, a receiver. And once again, going back to this receiving core has got some excellent depth. I mean, you lose your top receiver, but I mean, this team is bringing in 3 receivers out of the transfer portal. You got 2, or you got 1 from Colorado. You got Williams from Oklahoma, Mario Williams, and then Bynum from Washington, all 3 of which who had influences on each of their teams. So USC receiving core-wise looks really good going into next season. I wouldn't be concerned one bit, just considering this team is bringing in 3 good ones from the transfer portal. McCutcheon, a defensive back, is coming in from Oklahoma as well. Trigg is taking off to Ole Miss at tight end. Tifono, a defensive lineman, is in the transfer portal from USC. And then Shane Lee, a linebacker, is coming in from Alabama. Recruiting-wise, this team is number 65, so obviously not a very good ranking there, 10th in the Pac-12 as well. But once again, this transfer portal has been just fine for this team. I mean, recruiting-wise, this team really doesn't need anything. I mean, if you look at the transfer portal, I mean, this team has done just fine through that. So recruiting-wise, I'm really not too concerned. You got 1 5-star coming in and 4 4-stars if you look at it that way as well. But that said, let's look at your schedule now going into next season. You start off the year against Rice at home. Then you got Stanford on the road to open up your Pac-12 schedule. You got Fresno State coming to town, Oregon State on the road, Arizona State at home, and Washington State at home as well. You got a road trip to Utah and Arizona. And then November, you got California, Colorado, and then UCLA on the road, and then Notre Dame to finish out the season. So definitely, I mean, you got some difficult games on the schedule for sure, but that's a good thing. I mean, if you want any chance at making a run at a playoff, which I don't know if that's within reach or kind of out of reach for the Trojans next year. I mean, this team is pretty hard to predict considering they went 4-8 last year, but you're bringing in some big-time playmakers and an excellent head coach in Lincoln Riley. So there's a lot of factors at play here, and I think this team, there's no doubt they're going to get to a bowl game next year. I mean, I would be shocked if they didn't, but I mean, USC, this is a team that's got, I mean, you got some tough games on here. Notre Dame's going to be tough. Utah on the road is going to be tough. Same thing with Arizona State, Oregon State potentially on the road. So keep all that in mind. But looking at the first half of the schedule here, I'm going to say Rice is an easy win. Stanford on the road, I'm going to keep that as a yellow game, but I am going to favor the Trojans there. Fresno State as well is going to be an easy win. Really not expecting too much out of the Bulldogs going into next season. Oregon State on the road, very interesting matchup. That's going to be a big one. Beavers are kind of I mean, they were actually pretty good last year. We'll see how they do going into 2022, but potentially that could be a tough one. But I will favor USC in that game. Arizona State, then you got them coming to town. That's going to be a tough one. Sun Devils are a team that I think a lot of people are overlooking going into next season. Sun Devils, though, I do like where they're at right now, but I'm going to favor USC in that game as well. Same thing with Washington State. I will favor the Trojans in that game too, but definitely it's going to be close. So I do favor the Trojans in each of their first 6 games. There's a very high possibility this team starts out the season either 5-1 or 6-0. But that Utah game, that's where things get tough. I mean, Utes next year are going to be a really good football team. Wouldn't be surprised one bit if they were a big national contender. They got a lot of great returning production. Cameron Rising coming back. Things look really good for the Utes going into next season. So I'm going to favor Utah in that game against USC on the 15th. And it's also on the road in a tough environment. Arizona, California, both easy wins. Arizona on the road potentially could be maybe closer, but Arizona is just not a good team. I'll just put it straight up. Then you got California, once again, easy win. Colorado, I'm going to favor USC in that game as well, but I mean, Colorado's kind of just an unpredictable team as well. Some years they've got good talent, but they just extremely underperform, and that's kind of the theme with Colorado. Then you got UCLA on the road. I'm going to favor the Bruins in that game as well. That's a tough one to predict, but I mean, UCLA could be a good team next year as well, so I'm going to favor the Bruins right now, but that's basically a coin toss for me. And then you got Notre Dame. I'm going to favor the Irish in that game as they come to USC. I mean, that's going to be tough too. Notre Dame, that's a football team that's definitely got a few question marks, but recruiting-wise, they look excellent. They got some pretty good depth going into next season, so I wouldn't be surprised one bit if Notre Dame was once again a contender next year. But record projection for USC, 7-5 to 11-1. So I do expect this team to be a contender for sure, but the range is pretty wide of possibilities for this team. I could see this team anywhere between 7 and 11 wins for sure. I mean, this team could even go undefeated. It's within possibility for sure. But when you got Utah on the road, UCLA, and Notre Dame, I do think you'll lose at least one of those three. I mean, all three of those games are going to be tough for sure, especially, I mean, that Utah one on the road. Those Utes, they're looking excellent going into next season. But for now, yeah, USC 7-5 to 11-1. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below on the Trojans, and I appreciate you guys all watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.